The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation as a high-stakes murder trial unfolded in Riverbridge. Suddenly, a young boy's voice broke through the silence. "Stop this trial, I have something important to say." Gasps filled the room as heads turned toward the brave child standing alone in the aisle. What could he possibly reveal that would bring everything to a halt? If you've ever wondered how a single voice, no matter how small, can shift the course of events, then this story is for you. Welcome to Motivation for Success, where we share powerful stories of courage, determination, and life-changing moments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us to the end. You won't want to miss this incredible tale. Stop the trial. I have something to say. The boy, no older than 10, had hair so unkempt it stuck out in every direction. His cheeks were flushed, and his sneakers squeaked on the polished floor as he steadied himself. For an instant, the entire courtroom was frozen in place. The presiding judge, Judge Townsend, lifted her gavel but didn't slam it down. Instead, she stared at the boy, her brows furrowed in disbelief. A chorus of whispers rippled through the gallery, attorneys turning pages mid-argument, spectators leaning forward, and the defendant, Darrell Harris, a hollow-cheeked man on trial for murder, fixing the child with a stunned gaze. "Bailiff!" Judge Townsend finally barked. "Remove that child." Before the officer in charge could approach, the boy shouted, "You can't make me leave. I know the truth, and it will change everything." His voice trembled with emotion, but his eyes held a steady resolve. Chaos erupted. Reporters shifted in their seats, scribbling notes and snapping pictures, while members of the jury exchanged puzzled glances. All the while, the child refused to budge. At last, Judge Townsend banged her gavel for order, her knuckles whitening as she demanded silence. "Young man," she said, more quietly, "this is a serious proceeding. What could you possibly know about this case?" The boy swallowed and pointed straight at Darrell Harris. "He's not the one who did it. I can prove it." The boy's name was Jonas Fletcher, and he hailed from a tiny neighborhood in Bridgewood, a place known more for its community barbecues than high-stakes criminal proceedings. Jonas wasn't a troublemaker by nature. In fact, most folks described him as a quiet kid who spent afternoons with a baseball glove slung over his shoulder or riding his bicycle down the same old streets. His mother, Val Fletcher, worked long hours at a local diner, often leaving Jonas to his own devices after school. Yet nobody suspected he harbored secrets that could disrupt a murder trial. Jonas had never pictured himself standing before a stern judge, heart hammering in his chest. He was just a kid who happened to see something in the local meadow one day, something he couldn't forget no matter how hard he tried. In the scorching heat of an early summer, Jonas had been pedaling his bike on a winding path through that meadow. The air smelled of grass and distant pine, and dragonflies skimmed the water of a small pond. He should have been blissfully unaware of anything but sunshine and adventure, but what caught his eye instead was an argument near a parked car. He'd noticed a man fiercely gesturing at a woman. Though Jonas couldn't hear exact words, their body language was tense, her hands went up defensively, and the man kept pointing, looking over his shoulder as if worried someone might see them. Eventually, he shoved her inside the car and sped off. Unease gnawed at Jonas, but how could a kid intervene? Later, when he told his mother, she offered a kindly pat on his shoulder and said people sometimes argued, maybe it was a personal disagreement best left alone. But then Jonas caught the evening news. The woman who had gone missing, Nora Benson, looked eerily like the one he'd glimpsed in the meadow, except some details didn't match up. The news alleged that Nora had dark hair, while the woman Jonas observed had lighter hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Television reporters and social media all pointed to Darrell Harris as the suspect, describing how Darrell and Nora had been seen in a heated dispute days before she vanished. Fingerprints matched, and so did the timeline, local residents said. So, as the trial date inched closer, nearly everyone in Riverbridge was convinced Darrell Harris was guilty. Jonas, however, couldn't erase the feeling that something was off. The man he saw that day did resemble Daryl in build, but the woman's appearance contradicted everything on the news about Nora. Lying awake at night, Jonas replayed the scene. Maybe Daryl wasn't the culprit. Maybe someone else was. Anxiety built up until he felt he'd burst if he didn't speak up. When Jonas heard his mother mention she had jury duty at the courthouse, he seized the chance. "Mom, can I come see what it's like?" he pleaded, mustering his best innocent grin. Val, juggling her schedule, reluctantly said yes, unaware he had bigger plans than just watching a trial from the back row. Clutching a granola bar, Jonas slipped into the courtroom and found a seat during a lull in the proceedings. The prosecution methodically laid out evidence against Daryl Harris: fingerprints, phone records, tense witness statements. Each piece of testimony stacked up like bricks in an unshakable wall of guilt. Jonas scanned the faces, the public defenders looking world-weary, the prosecutor, Mr. Palmer, exuding confidence, and most of all Daryl, who stared blankly at his own hands as though he knew he stood no chance. A wave of restlessness washed over Jonas. He thought about simply going home. But then he saw Daryl stand to testify. Daryl's posture was rigid, his words quiet. He looked defeated, and Jonas's chest constricted at the sight. In that moment, every misgiving Jonas had roared to life. The next thing he knew, he was on his feet in the aisle, shouting for the trial to stop. The moment Jonas finished his outburst, Judge Townsend ordered him to her private chambers. As the heavy door closed, the sudden hush made Jonas's heart pound even louder. He found himself perched in a large leather chair, dwarfed by towering shelves of law books and the judge's imposing desk. Judge Townsend walked in, removed her glasses, and folded her arms. "Young man, state your name." "Jonas Fletcher," he managed, voice quavering. She regarded him coolly. "And you claim you have knowledge that proves Daryl Harris is innocent. Explain yourself." Jonas told her about that sunny afternoon in the meadow, describing the woman's features and the man's anxious glances. He explained the mismatch. The news said Nora had dark hair, but the woman he saw had lighter hair. Jonah recounted how the man's expression seemed more panicked than angry, how everything about it just felt wrong. Judge Townsend listened with guarded skepticism. "Is anyone aware of this besides you?" she asked. Jonas nodded. "I told my mom, but she didn't think it mattered." The judge steepled her fingers. "Jonas, do you understand how serious this is? People's lives are at stake. Simply saying you saw something or someone isn't enough to overturn a murder case. We'll need corroboration." Jonas felt a pang of dread. I know, Your Honor. But I had to speak. I can't let an innocent person go to jail." For a moment, Judge Townsend's eyes softened. "I admire your courage. But let me handle how we proceed. You'll return home with your mother, and the court will sort out what, if any, steps need to be taken." Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Daryl Harris sat with his head still spinning. Who was this boy standing up for him? Daryl had lost nearly everything since Nora vanished: friends, work, his own sense of self. Although no official verdict was out, the world already treated him like a murderer. Now here came this kid, claiming to have evidence that could exonerate him. It felt like a flicker of hope in an otherwise dark room. Judge Townsend soon returned to the bench, announcing that an unexpected development had come to light and that the trial would be recessed until further investigation could be done. Reporters murmured and jostled for interviews. Afterward, Jonas slipped out the back corridor, praying he'd done the right thing. His mother, Val, learned the truth soon enough, and her anger was palpable. "You could be charged with contempt. This is grown-up business," she scolded, albeit with tears in her eyes from sheer worry. Jonas hunched his shoulders and mumbled, "I'm sorry, Mom, but I had to. Maybe Daryl isn't guilty." The next day, Jonas was summoned to speak with the lawyers. Ms. Gray, Daryl's defense attorney, drilled him with questions. Where exactly were you standing? Could you see the license plate? Did the woman fit any part of Nora's description? Jonas did his best to answer, though frustration gnawed at him because he didn't have a perfect memory or all the details they sought. The prosecutor, Mr. Palmer, scoffed openly. This child's recollection could be a misunderstanding. The evidence against Darrell is irrefutable. Judge Townsend mediated, her expression guarded. Let the defense investigate the boy's testimony. We'll see if it leads anywhere. Still, Jonas felt a sense of dread. He feared that nobody would take him seriously. And if the real perpetrator was out there, wouldn't they want to keep him quiet? That night, as Jonas lay awake, he heard a faint rustling outside his bedroom window. His heart lurched. The silhouette of a figure loomed in the darkness, shifting near the shrubs. Terrified, Jonas crawled to the window's edge, phone in hand, preparing to dial 911. But by the time he worked up the nerve, the figure was gone. When he told Val, she tried brushing it off as a bad dream, until they discovered footprints in the yard the following morning. Jonas decided to search for more evidence. Over the weekend, he pedaled back to the meadow, scanning for anything suspicious. That's where he stumbled upon a discarded jewelry item stuck in the mud, a trinket shaped like a small seashell. It felt significant, especially after rechecking photos of Nora on news sites. In one, she wore a seashell pendant. Could this be connected, or was it a random coincidence? Jonas pocketed it regardless. He confided in Ms. Gray, who was busy building Darrell's defense. Inspecting the trinket, Ms. Gray's eyes went wide with interest. This is exactly the kind of detail the police overlooked. If it matches Nora's pendant, it might alter the timeline of her last known whereabouts. She also warned Jonas, it's dangerous for you to keep hunting for clues alone. If someone's threatened you already, you could be in real danger. Late one afternoon, Jonas left school, heading home under a murky sky threatening rain. The sidewalk was deserted except for one figure leaning against a lamppost, a tall man in a dark hoodie. As Jonas drew closer, the man stepped forward, blocking his path. Should have stayed out of it, kid, he whispered, voice low and menacing. Jonas's stomach churned. He clutched his backpack straps, eyes darting for an escape. Who are you? The man smirked but didn't answer. You don't know what you're messing with. Fear strangled Jonas's voice. Then, as headlights swung around the corner, the man hissed under his breath and retreated. Jonas stood rooted in place for several heartbeats before sprinting the rest of the way home. In a shaking voice, he told Val everything. She contacted the authorities, who promised extra patrols. Officer Patel, a level-headed investigator, took a statement from Jonas, scribbling notes as he described the hooded figure. Despite the threats, Jonas refused to back down. Ms. Gray discovered a lead. Apparently, Nora Benson had an ex-partner named Travis York. Some accounts suggested Nora had ended that relationship months before dating Darrell. According to rumors, Travis's temper was vicious, and he owned a car resembling the one spotted near the meadow on the day Jonas saw the argument. The local police had never fully investigated Travis because they were so fixated on Darrell. Jonas's findings, plus Ms. Gray's urging, convinced Officer Patel to track down Travis York. Meanwhile, Jonas shared every detail he could recall. The more they learned, the more tangled the story became. Texts from Travis threatening Nora, sightings of Travis with a blonde woman who might be a friend or accomplice, and so on. Finally, a break came. An old friend of Nora's named Jessa Lang was rumored to have had a falling out with Nora just before she vanished. Jessa hadn't been seen for weeks. Some people suspected she might have left town to avoid the media frenzy. Others whispered she might have known who truly harmed Nora. If Jonas had glimpsed a confrontation involving a blonde woman, could that have been Jessa? Late one evening, Jonas and Val were preparing to turn in. Officer Patel had placed a patrol car outside their apartment building, but it did little to soothe Jonas's nerves. He perched by the window, glancing at the streetlights glowing in the darkness below. Then his phone buzzed with an unknown email, subject line reading, "Stop now." The message was chillingly simple: keep your mouth shut, or else. Attached was a photo of Jonas's bedroom window from outside, proof the sender was disturbingly close. Jonas's hands trembled as he showed the email to Val. She gasped in horror, immediately forwarding it to Officer Patel. Within minutes, police lights flashed below, but by then, the street was empty. Fear coiled in Jonas's stomach. Yet no matter how scared he felt, he clung to a sense of responsibility. In the following days, Ms. Gray and Officer Patel uncovered financial documents linking Travis York to suspicious transactions around the time Nora went missing. A previously overlooked security camera shot placed Travis's car near the meadow the same morning Jonas claimed to have seen the argument. Combined with Jonas's recollection that the woman had lighter hair, potentially Jessa's, the puzzle pieces were finally aligning. But the real crescendo came when Ms. Gray located Jessa, terrified and hiding in another county. According to Jessa's statement, she had tried to warn Nora about Travis's unhinged behavior. The day Jonas saw them by the meadow, Jessa confronted Travis, worried he intended to force Nora into giving him money or staying silent about certain shady dealings. Jessa insisted that Daryl Harris was Nora's friend, not her enemy. Armed with Jessa's testimony, Ms. Gray requested an emergency hearing. By now, the press swarmed any story related to Daryl. On the appointed day, Jonas found himself seated near the front, his heart fluttering. He spotted that same hooded man lurking at the back of the courtroom, but Officer Patel and her colleagues were stationed strategically throughout the gallery. Judge Townsend listened intently as Ms. Gray introduced Jessa to the stand. Jessa, trembling, recounted how she saw Travis strike Nora days before her disappearance, how Travis coerced Jessa into keeping quiet, and how everything pointed away from Daryl as the culprit. Jonas felt the tension in the courtroom thicken like storm clouds. The prosecutor, Mr. Palmer, looked furious. "Your Honor," he protested, "this is last minute. We haven't had time to authenticate these claims. The evidence is circumstantial." Judge Townsend, however, held up a hand, reminding him that seeking the truth in a murder trial outweighed procedural inconveniences. "We will hear all relevant testimony," she declared. "No stone will be left unturned in the pursuit of justice." At that moment, an uproar erupted near the entrance. A detective dragged in Travis York, handcuffed, with a sullen expression. The hooded man who had terrorized Jonas was also detained. While the entire gallery buzzed, Jonas locked eyes with the man who had threatened him. Relief and vindication coursed through his veins. This nightmare was finally coming to light. Over the next week, investigators pieced together the final narrative. Travis York orchestrated Nora's disappearance after she threatened to expose his criminal activities. The blonde woman Jonas saw had indeed been Jessa, valiantly trying to stop Travis. Daryl Harris had been an easy scapegoat. All the evidence pointing to him was shaky once scrutinized with fresh eyes. At trial's end, Daryl was exonerated. When the judge announced his release, tears of relief shone on Daryl's face. Afterward, Ms. Gray approached Jonas. "You understand you changed this man's life, don't you?" she said softly. "If you hadn't spoken up, he might have gone to prison for something he never did." Jonas shrugged with shy pride. "I just knew something was wrong. I couldn't keep it to myself." Officer Patel joined them, giving Jonas a warm smile. "You taught everyone a lesson about listening to even the smallest voices. We can't always rely on assumptions." Nearby, Val Fletcher stood watching, both pride and concern mingling in her expression. "Jonas," she murmured, drawing him into a hug, "I was so worried for you. But I'm proud you did what was right." By the time the legal dust settled, word spread across Riverbridge about the kid who halted a murder trial. People approached Jonas to thank him, or pat his shoulder, or snap a picture, an odd twist for a boy used to quiet afternoons. Through it all, Jonas never forgot the fear he felt confronting real danger. Yet that fear led to something greater, the power of truth. Sometimes the most overlooked voice can be the difference between injustice and redemption. Courage isn't reserved for adults, it can belong to anyone brave enough to speak out, even a child who sees what others dismiss. This story shows how a single testimony can unravel lies, how determination can spark a chain reaction of revelations, and how standing up for what's right can safeguard more than one life. If you found yourself moved by Jonas Fletcher's journey from silent witness to key figure in a high-stakes trial, remember this: the difference between complacency and courage often lies in a single moment of choice. You don't need to face life-threatening risks to do the right thing. Sometimes it's as simple as challenging an untrue rumor, standing up for a bullied classmate, or reporting wrongdoing when you see it. When the final gavel fell, Jonas walked out of the courthouse with his mother's arm protectively around him. The sun felt especially warm, the sky brilliantly blue, as though the world had shifted in a single day. Darrell Harris stepped out a free man, offering Jonas a teary grin of gratitude. Officer Patel gave him a final thumbs up. A wave of relief and triumph washed over Jonas, a spark of hope flickering in his chest. He knew life would go on, full of mundane routines like homework and ballgames, but also with the memory of how one small act of bravery had changed everything. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where speaking up felt scary, yet staying silent felt wrong? Share your experiences in the comments, and if this story touched you, consider showing a little courage in your own life today. And don't forget, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of resilience, justice, and the extraordinary ways ordinary people make a difference. Because each of us holds the power to speak truth, protect the vulnerable, and spark hope, one voice at a time.